Okay, let's just take a second and pause, look around. It's January 2026. And if you're feeling a little, let's say, breathless, you are definitely not the only one. We are living through a moment where the ground under our feet feels like it's shifting every single day.
Breathless is the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
It feels like we're all trying to read a book in the middle of a hurricane.
Right. We've got technology moving faster than our brains can physically process. Social structures are, bending, maybe breaking. And honestly, it just feels like the default setting for the entire world right now is outrage.
It really does. It feels like anger has a viral coefficient of about 1,000, while understanding is what's stuck on dial-up. Reaction gets rewarded instantly by the algorithm, and reflection is, well, it's kind of becoming a lost art.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive feels so necessary. We are digging into the Rogues Culture Manifesto, and specifically the work of author E.R. Clayton. Now, you see that title, Manifesto, and you might think, okay, are we talking about anarchy, burning things down?
No. Put the matches away. It's actually the opposite. This isn't a manifesto for chaos. It's a manifesto for, I think, sanity. It's a deep, almost philosophical look at the why beneath our culture. It's about identity, history, and frankly, a user manual for staying human in a world that wants to turn us all into data points.
And what's wild about this source material is just the scope of it. We aren't just looking at the chaos of 2026. The author asks us to time travel. We're going to go all the way back to the colonial history of Barbados in the 17th century and then snap right back to this AI-driven landscape we're living in now.
It sounds like a massive jump, I know. But the mission here is to connect those dots. We're exploring how reflection, awareness, and conscience can survive in such a noisy world. The central tension, and this is really the hook for today, is this. How do we stay human when machines are actively reshaping our culture? While at the same time, history is still dictating our biases, often without us even knowing it.
So the past is pulling us one way, the future is pulling us another, and we're just stuck in the middle. Let's start with the past. Because the source material anchors this whole conversation in a very specific place. Barbados. Now, for a lot of people, Barbados is a vacation spot, it's beaches, tourism. But Clayton describes it as something much heavier. He calls it a living classroom and a template for the Atlantic world. Why there? Why Barbados?
This is a really crucial distinction, and the text leans into the historical mechanics. Barbados matters because, according to the records, it was the world's first slave society in the colonial plantation system.
Wait, I want to parse that. Slave society versus what? A society that just happens to have slaves. Is there a meaningful difference there, or is it just, semantics?
Oh, it's a massive structural difference.
Yeah.
A society with slaves has slavery as an institution, maybe a horrible side hustle of the economy.
A feature of it.
Exactly. But a slave society is an economy defined by slavery. It is the operating system. Barbados was the laboratory where they figured out how to make that system work on a massive scale. It was a place where race, power, identity, these weren't abstract concepts. They were the brutal daily reality of the economic engine.
So it was the prototype.
Precisely. It was kind of the Silicon Valley of colonial exploitation. This is where they invented the specific racial categories, the hierarchy, to justify treating humans like farm equipment. And the source argues that Barbados created a template that was then exported. It spread to America, the rest of the Caribbean, to Europe.
That's a fascinating perspective, that the social structures we are still dealing with were basically beta tested on this one island.
Exactly. And the argument here, and this is where it gets sticky for us today, is that those systems of control, those social structures from the 1600s, they didn't just vanish when the laws changed.
Right. You don't just delete the operating system and expect the computer to forget how to run. The laws change, the chains come off, but the habits of perception, I think that's a phrase from the text, they stick around.
They resonate. They echo through law, economics, culture. But, and I really want to emphasize this because the text does, this is not just a story of victimhood. If we only look at the oppression, we miss the actual point of the manifesto. The source emphasizes that within this fracture, within this terrible machine, people still created meaning.
They hacked the system.
In a way, yes. They created humor, culture, faith, rebellion. The text mentions that qualities like resilience and humor weren't just sentimental soft skills. They were forms of defiance. They were proof of life.
That's such an important reframing. We usually think of humor as, entertainment, but in a high-pressure environment like that, humor is armor.
It's armor, and it's a weapon. It's a way to reclaim agency. When the system says you are nothing but labor, laughing at the absurdity of it is a way of saying, no, I am a person, I see what you're doing, and I'm still here. Barbados shows us that identity is never neutral. It is always shaped by power. And the reason he calls it a living classroom is that you can still see it today. You can see how dignity and bias coexist in the same space. It teaches us that racism isn't just an individual act of meanness. It's structural. It's learned, repeated, and internalized.
Which brings us to one of the most interesting and I think uncomfortable concepts in this manifesto, the anatomy of bias. Because I think a lot of us, especially in 2026, we like to believe, hey, I'm a good person, I'm fair-minded, I don't have those prejudices. We think we've outgrown the 17th century.
Right, the whole I don't see color or I treat everyone the same thing.
Exactly, but the source challenges that comfort zone pretty hard.
It really does. It talks about internalized racism and unexamined certainty. The idea is that these patterns get normalized across generations. It's like background radiation. Even people who think of themselves as fair and well-meaning can perpetuate harm, not out of active hatred. They aren't waking up trying to be villains, but just out of autopilot.
There's a specific story in the source material that really drove this home for me, the teacher anecdote. Can you walk us through that? Because I think it just flips the usual narrative on its head.
It really does. So the source describes a teacher, very well-intentioned, clearly cares, who spent months working with her students on race, stereotyping, how to respond to harmful remarks. It was thoughtful, empathetic work. She really put the effort in, thinking she was, inoculating the next generation against bias.
Standard operating procedure, right. Teach the kids, fix the future.
Right. But a year later, she goes back to these students, and she asks the million-dollar question, did it help? Did the training work?
And I'm guessing the answer wasn't a resounding, yes, racism is solved.
Far from it. The answer was, well, it was devastating. The students said, essentially, you were teaching the wrong people. It isn't us who need this, it's the teachers. It's the leaders. It's the adults in charge.
Wow. It isn't us who need this. That hits hard.
It completely flips the script. We often focus our efforts on the youth, thinking they're the ones who need to learn tolerance. But the students saw clearly that the harm was coming from the authority figures, the people operating on those habits of perception we talked about. The kids were fine. The system was the problem.
It really highlights that idea that harm so often comes from people who think they are doing the right thing or who just haven't questioned their own authority. They're running that 17th century software we talked about earlier.
Unexamined certainty. That is the danger zone.
Yeah.
And that is why the manifesto argues that reflection can't just be a passive state.
Yeah.
We tend to think of reflection as, sitting in a quiet room with a cup of tea, thinking deep thoughts. But in this context, reflection is described as ethical work.
Ethical work. I like that. It implies effort, sweat, equity.
It's a practice. It's active. The text lists specific things to notice. Where bias lives, where care is missing, where humor protects, and where memory hurts.
Where humor protects. I want to circle back to that because it connects right back to the Barbados example. It's about noticing the space between all the noise and the actual meaning. If we don't slow down to ask who we are and how we came to be this way, we just keep wounding each other, even without meaning to.
And that's the bridge to the next part of this whole discussion.
Yeah.
Because if we were just running on autopilot, repeating history's mistakes, what happens when we introduce a technology that is designed to automate everything?
Okay, so we've established we're carrying around this historical baggage, these habits of perception. Now, let's fast forward to right now, the updated January 2026 section of the source material.
This is where the rubber meets the road. Because now, into this fragile mix of identity and history, we introduce a new disruptor, artificial intelligence.
The source calls AI a force causing disorientation, and I think everyone listening can feel that in their gut. We aren't just talking about, will ChatGPT take my job? It's the fragmentation of communities, how we communicate, how we even know what's real.
It's a crisis of meaning. The manifesto frames AI as a massive cultural shifting force. Think about it. Traditionally, your identity was tied to your labor, your local community, your role. As AI automates labor and digitizes community, those anchors are just dissolving.
It's unmooring us.
Exactly. People are experiencing a profound loss of meaning. If a machine can write the poem, paint the picture, code the software, what is the human for?
But the source isn't all doom and gloom on this, right? It doesn't just say robots are taking over, game over.
No, and I appreciate that balance.
Yeah.
It avoids the dystopian panic. The source suggests AI can also act as a catalyst. It argues that while it disrupts, it also has the potential to strip away the robotic parts of our jobs, the repetitive labor, the drudgery.
It's stuff nobody wants to do anyway.
Theoretically. The hope is that it could free us up for more human-centered tasks, work that requires emotional intelligence, creativity, judgment, ethical nuance.
But that's the big if, isn't it? That requires us to actually value those things.
That is the ethical challenge of 2026. And the text frames it perfectly. We have to ensure that efficiency doesn't replace dignity, and innovation doesn't outpace compassion.
Efficiency doesn't replace dignity. That feels like the core struggle. Because when we talk about AI, or even back with the plantation system, the goal was always efficiency, maximum output.
You nailed it. That is the dark parallel the author is drawing. In the plantation system, efficiency was God. Human dignity was the cost. We're seeing a parallel danger now, where we might optimize our society to the point where we lose the very things that make us human. We might create a perfectly efficient world that has no place for people in it.
That is a sobering thought. We're risking building a digital version of that old hierarchy, just with better branding.
Exactly. And that's why the conversation about AI can't just be about technology. It has to be about culture. It has to be about identity.
So we have this convergence, the legacy of the past bias and hierarchy meeting the pressure of the future AI and displacement. It sounds chaotic.
It is chaotic. But this brings us to the core philosophy of RoguesCulture. The manifesto argues for something called reflective rebellion.
I love that term, reflective rebellion. It sounds cool, but let's break it down. What does it actually mean in practice? Is it protesting in the streets or something internal?
It's primarily internal, which then shapes the external. It means putting humanity first. Yeah. But it also involves a very surprising take on chaos. The source material suggests that chaos can be a virtue.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. Usually chaos is the thing I'm trying to avoid. I want stability. I want my Wi-Fi to work.
Of course. But the argument is that stability often hides the rot. When things are stable, we don't question the system. When things break down, when the old structures stop working like they are right now, you actually get a chance to see what's underneath. You get to see reality without the varnish.
So instead of freaking out when things get messy, we should look at it as an opportunity to see things clearly for the first time.
Precisely. Chaos strips away the pretenses. And that is where the concept of the rogue comes in.
The rogue. Now, in movies, the rogue is the solitary hero, maybe the thief. Han Solo. What is a rogue here?
In this context, a rogue isn't a villain, and they aren't necessarily a lone wolf. A rogue is defined as a truth seeker navigating a fragile future. It's someone who refuses to just accept the default settings, whether those settings come from colonial history or a generative AI model.
So being a rogue in 2026 means being the person who's willing to look at the chaos, look at the history, and say, okay, what is actually true here? What is actually human?
Yes, it's about agency. The source emphasizes that this philosophy is about preparation. It's about equipping you, the listener, with the moral awareness to handle a future that demands so much adaptability. If you don't understand your own history and biases, you're going to be washed away by the technological tide. You'll just be driftwood.
It's about having an anchor.
Identity true. Examined identity becomes the anchor.
This circles back to something the text said earlier. The deep dive is the space between noise and meaning. We have so much noise right now. The AI noise, political noise, outrage noise. Being a rogue means carving out that silence to actually think.
And that thinking has to be critical. We have to question our assumptions. We have to look at our own habits of perception. The text asks us to look not only outward at the problem, pointing fingers at CEOs or politicians, but inward. Where does responsibility live in me?
That's the hard work. It's so much easier to tweet about how the world is broken than to ask, how am I contributing to the fracture?
It is. But that's the only way we get to what the manifesto calls cultural resilience. We need to be resilient enough to handle what's coming without losing our souls.
You know, connecting this back to the teacher story, those kids were resilient. They saw the truth. They saw the system was the problem, not them. Maybe we need to tap into that kind of clarity.
That is the reflective rebellion.
Wow.
It's refusing to accept the narrative that's handed to you. It's asserting your right to define your own humanity. It's saying, I am not just a data set, and I'm not just a product of history. I'm here right now, making a choice.
So let's try to synthesize this for everyone listening. We've covered a lot of ground. We started in 17th century Barbados, looking at how the invention of racial categories created a template for the world, a system of bias we are still unlearning.
And we saw that this history serves as a warning. It shows us how easily humans can dehumanize one another for the sake of a system, for efficiency.
And then we jumped to 2026, where a new system, artificial intelligence, is threatening a different kind of dehumanizing. Reshaping work, identity, community. potentially prioritizing speed over dignity.
And the solution offered by the Rogues Culture Manifesto is to stop reacting and start reflecting, to recognize that history lives inside us. We aren't blank slates. We're carrying these patterns that need to be examined.
The call to action here is deceptively simple. Pause before reacting.
It sounds simple, like something you'd see on a bumper sticker, but in an age of instant outrage, where every notification demands a response, pausing is a radical act. It's an act of rebellion. Pause. Look again before you judge. Recognize that the person you're disagreeing with is also carrying a history inside them.
It's resisting the urge to just be another cog in the outrage machine.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the lingering question the source material leaves us with. It's a provocative thought, and I want you to really chew on this as you go about your day.
The question is this. As artificial intelligence matures and reshapes how we relate to one another, how we work, talk, live, live, and home, what actually happens to cultural identity?
Does it just dissolve into the digital noise? Do we become an average of all our data? Or does cultural identity become the only anchor we have left?
If everything else is artificial, our cultural identity, our history, our flaws, our resilience, our weird sense of humor might be the only thing that proves we're real.
That is a huge thought. Maybe being real, flaws and all, is the ultimate rebellion in 2026.
I think it might be. Being human is the new punk rock.
I love that. We're going to leave it there. This has been a deep dive into the Rogues Culture Manifesto. Thank you for listening. And remember, stay curious, stay human, and maybe be a little bit of a rogue today.
See you next time.
And be sure to register for the book launch at sample.roguesinparadise.com.